right, welcome everybody to another edition of RSG Insider. It's our podcast series here at RSG, and today I'm really excited to be joined by Jenny Benitez. She's a senior analyst with RSG. And today, Jenny and I are going to talk a little bit about community benefits. That sounds very nebulous and vague, and I'm hoping in the next 10 minutes we'll make it sound a little bit less cryptic. So with that, Jenny, why don't you tell us a little about yourself and your background before you got to RSG and what you do here?
Sure thing. So my name is Jenny Benitez. My background is in economics, and I have a research background as well in the supply chain logistics industry. And then I made my way to RSG, and now we're working with cities in economic development, real estate, all kinds of economics and city development, and community benefits.
Yeah, and you've done a lot, and you've been with us for about 3 years now, and you've done a lot of work for us in this space. Let's talk about when we say community benefits, or it's sometimes called public benefits. What does that mean?
So I think it's a good idea to start with the end in mind.
Okay.
Community benefits is a little complex, but let's start with the end product, which is, let's go with an example. In the Bay Area, in the city of San Carlos, there's a life science project, like 400,000 square feet. And from this project, the developer agreed to build a childcare center that was suitable for 100 kids. And they provided like $4 million in total in what we're calling community benefits. And that went to like a bike path, a walking path. So we're seeing these public amenities come from these development projects. So that's kind of where we end up.
And just to be clear, like these aren't necessarily things that the project was already going to build, like a lot of courtyard, developments are happening right now, or even that childcare center. They could have built a childcare center that would have supported the size of the project, but in this case, that project in San Carlos had a much bigger facility. So it was that additional sized facility that was really like the community benefit there.
Right.
So it's things that are like over and above what are like your normal requirement,
Yeah,
right?
above and beyond is key term.
Yeah. So, we work all over California, and somebody's probably thinking, okay, that sounds predictable in a market like the Bay Area, but is this happening anywhere else?
It's not just the Bay Area. I know it's tempting to think that, but we have done research into this extensively and have seen it across California. And we've worked with several cities, but including Jurupa Valley, which I know you worked on as well. They got these public benefits towards permanent supportive housing and arts and community funds, so suited to their needs. But yeah, all across California.
Yeah. And so, what's the process that, these are projects that are going through the development process. So what is the process or the method that cities would use to figure out what these public benefits would be?
Yeah, so community benefits, we use that term to refer to the benefits themselves, but that's also kind of what this framework is called. And the big idea is you're putting a value, the city is putting a value on development approvals. So to clarify that, you have a development project. They're allowed to build by right, which means they're allowed to build by what the zoning code allows. That's always allowed, But as soon as they want to build higher or with more density or a greater floor area ratio, then
what the zoning code would allow.
Yeah,
right.
Once they want to go, beyond the zoning code, that's when the city, it's like a trigger. The city can place a value on those development approvals, and that's what begins this process. You place a value on it, and then you can talk about splitting that value between the city and the developer.
Right. So it's like an exchange, right? I mean, on one hand, you've got an applicant who has the choice of building by right under the zoning code, and they can build their project. We're normally talking about commercial real estate, we should say, to start with, but
Yeah.
and then if they want to do more, that's when they start to get into these conversations, and it's something, I guess, like an exchange, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's the perfect word. It's an exchange. So they are getting these development approvals. So the question is, what is the community getting? Because you want to split that value. You're not just giving away development approvals. It's an exchange in that the community has an opportunity here to get something back, to split that value, to
Right.
exchange this. Yeah.
Right. So, okay, so there's probably a lawyer or two watching this right now and freaking out because it sounds like they're like this is sort of how being forced upon an applicant, just I assume simply needing to get an entitlement approval. How do we, how do you work around that? I mean, is there is there a legal authority to do this kind of thing? Would you say, and how would you describe it?
Yeah, we've worked with attorneys, and it's fair to freak out, but this is done with development agreements. And as long as you're precise and cautious with the language, you don't want to call them impact fees. They're not impact fees. You can't exactly require it in the same way you can other things. It's a voluntary exchange, but I mean, we've seen it work out many times. It is a voluntary exchange. You get a development agreement and it works out.
Yeah. And to me, like an example of it, like almost every project does something for the neighborhood. Like every developer comes in and they want to appease the neighbors, so they'll spend a couple $100,000 and
Yeah,
do some additional benefit. But this is like taking that same sort of voluntary nature process, and because the developer wants a development agreement, which has advantages to the developer,
definitely.
obviously not just the value that they create from the higher, bigger development that maybe is more profitable to them, but also provides the clarity around what they can build and the
Right.
timing and that. So can you talk about from the perspective of both like the developer and what each party gains as well as like the city? What are they gaining from this?
Yeah, so ideally, these are win-win situations. I really see it as a chance to do that win-win. The developer is interested, no surprise, because it could make a project more profitable. It impacts feasibility because sometimes they need those development approvals to really bring to life the project they have in mind. And a lot of times it doesn't even really make sense without the development approvals. So they're very invested. It's more profitable, more feasible. It's the project they have in mind. Maybe they really like the city for a certain reason. They want to be part of a scene. Lots of motivation there.
Yeah.
And then on the city's end, of course, it's a chance to get funding for things that the community has been wanting. So every city's different, but if they need more funding for housing, parks, what have you, that's the city's investment.
Yeah. And that's kind of gets to an area where we can kind of struggle, right? Because a lot of times, we're brought in as an outside consultant, and we can certainly do the economic analysis and guide them through the legal process,
Right.
working with their attorneys. But, in terms of priorities and what they should be, what community benefits this community should be seeking, that's not something you really want the outside consultant to do, So, like, what is it that, you would advise a city who's maybe thinking about doing this to how might they go about establishing priorities themselves?
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, we don't do that we don't, tell a city what their priorities are. That's something that has to come from the city and the community. We've seen this done successfully through community engagement, that's surveys, in-person workshops, social media engagement, really any way you can think of getting the community's input. Um, like you said, each city is different, so important to get feedback from the people who live there.
And that's really important too, because if you leave it to the developer to come up with what those priorities would be, their chances are they're going to look at what their project's giving and say, well, my project's the community benefit, right? So
Yeah.
it's like they're naturally going to start from that vantage point. So really having priorities established around what public benefits, public amenities, public facilities that the city wants, future applicants to focus on really provides not only clarity for the consultants who's working on this, but also the developers who are coming into your town, so that they
Right.
have some idea of like what's important to you,
Definitely.
and they're not just guessing.
Yeah.
Right, right. Which ultimately, especially if the city's done a good job with engagement. I know we worked in some cities where they've had community engagement on specific plans, and then it's just kind of like feeds into how do we make sure these things get built, and
Right.
that flows into there. So, in terms of like some of the work that we do, can you? I mean, it's obviously technical work, but how would you describe like the generally, how we go about establishing? We've talked about what the community benefit should be, but every project is going to have a different amount potentially of what that total amount is worth, and the value. And how do you decide, if whether this project should be providing $2 million of community benefits, $4 million, or $40 million? How do we do that?
Right. Like you said, it's technical stuff, but I love this part. RSG, this is what we do. We come in, we put a value on the development approvals. So we come to a figure that makes sense, that's backed up by data, research, analysis, and that's of the local market, of the land use, of historical trends, current trends. So there's a lot that goes into what that number is going to be. Like you said, every city's so different.
And eventually it's just a negotiation. I mean,
Right, right.
from there, there's a recognition that, look, this applicant's not coming in to build something because it's less profitable. In almost every case, it's more profitable. And, this voluntary exchange, and to my view, is like, if the city sets standards for what future development is going to look like through their general plan and zoning, to alter those standards, that's a change to the community, and it's only fair for the city to look at that the same way developers looking at that.
Right.
Like, if there's profit in it for them, we should see some profit in it for us,
Yeah.
right? So, are there any projects you've worked on that you feel like were kind of interesting to you, and maybe what made it interesting?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, first off, this generally is some of my favorite work at RSG. There's a lot we do, but this is so interesting, and that's just, it can be technical, it can be like spreadsheets for a while, and then at the end of it, you see a child care center.
Right.
Or like you get to think of where the park's gonna be. So it goes from numbers and computers to a very real community thing. The child care center is honestly one of my favorite ones. It's just so tangible. You think of kids, it's cool. It really fulfilled a need there. There's a bunch of things.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I can think of that in the same community. I think we did a job where, they didn't have a lot of like retail establishments, and any development today, we're always thinking about how do we reduce car trips and make projects more serving the immediate community. And in this case, the market wasn't quite there yet to build like a small cafe, but by creating that space to do that, and providing an incentive effectively for the developer to build that, it allows that use to come into that space and serve the community at a time when it's really needed, and then ultimately reduce trips and things of that sort. So I'm going to remind you, Jenny, like you just said, this is your favorite, type of work, because, in future podcasts, you're not going to have to say that about everything you do. Okay, but it is an important thing, and you are very proud of it, and that's awesome. And I love that about your passion and the work you do, and it's evident in everything. You've spoken about community benefits already at the CalEd Annual Conference earlier. I know later this year you're going to be at the APA Annual Conference in Riverside. In September. Right. So check out Jenny and our team and our panel on that if you're interested to find out more. It's going to focus more about industrial. And thank you all for joining us today, talking about community benefits, and meeting my colleague Jenny Benitez, Senior Analyst with RSG, and wish you guys a great day.